The old man stood quietly at the entrance of the upscale restaurant, wearing a faded army jacket and a weathered cap clutched tightly in his hand. His name was Walter Green, 78 years old, a black war veteran who had served his country with honor through two brutal wars. But here, in this polished, modern space filled with chatter and laughter, he was invisible. That is, until he was seen, but not with kindness. The hostess glanced at him with hesitation. But before she could speak, a sharp voice from behind interrupted. It was the manager. His eyes ran from Walter's wrinkled coat down to his old boots, and with a stiff, dismissive tone, he said, "Sir, we have a dress code here. You can't be served looking like that." For a moment, silence fell over the tables near the entrance. A few patrons turned to look, some with curiosity, others with smirks. No one said a word in his defense. Walter didn't argue. He'd faced worse. He simply nodded, muttered understood, and turned to leave. His back was slightly bent, not from weakness, but from decades of carrying the weight of battles both abroad and at home. He didn't expect recognition. He just wanted a meal, some peace. But as he shuffled toward the door, the sound of chairs scraping echoed across the room. One, then two, then four more. 6 men stood in complete silence. Strong, upright, their suits hiding what the world couldn't see, tattoos, scars, and a brotherhood forged in fire. One of them stepped forward. His voice broke the stillness. That man saved our lives." The restaurant froze. Whispers turned to silence. The manager's smugness melted away. And for the first time in a long while, Walter paused, not from rejection, but from recognition. What happened next was something no one in that room would forget. It was a moment that exposed more than just one man's quiet dignity. It revealed how easily the world forgets its true heroes, and how powerfully they're remembered when the right people choose to rise. Walter Green wasn't always old, tired, and forgotten. There was a time when his name meant something, at least to the few who survived, because of him. Born in a small, segregated town in Alabama in 1946, Walter grew up in a world that was stacked against him from the start. His father was a janitor, his mother cleaned houses for wealthy white families. They didn't have much, but they raised him with discipline, faith, and an unwavering sense of right and wrong. At just 17, Walter enlisted in the Army, not because he wanted to fight, but because he wanted a chance. A chance to be more than what the world told him he could be. In 1965, he was deployed to Vietnam. What he saw there would shape him forever. He wasn't the biggest or the fastest, but he had something other soldiers followed without question: courage under fire. During a brutal ambush deep in the jungle, Walter's unit was pinned down. Gunfire echoed through the trees, and bodies fell around him like broken branches. Radios were dead. Reinforcements weren't coming. But Walter didn't flinch. Crawling through mud and blood, he carried 3 wounded men on his back, one by one, dragging them behind a collapsed tree that served as their only cover. He took shrapnel in his shoulder and leg but refused evacuation. He kept fighting, kept leading, kept protecting. By the time backup arrived, they found him bleeding and half-conscious, still firing his last rounds to keep his brothers alive. For his bravery, Walter was awarded the Silver Star. But when he returned home, there was no parade. No thanks. Just more whispers, more doors closed, more "not here, sir," and "try somewhere else." He never spoke of the war, never showed off his medals. He took a job as a mechanic, worked long hours, and built a quiet life. His wife passed away a few years ago. His only daughter moved to another state. Walter had outlived most of his friends, buried too many brothers, and learned that quiet pain doesn't mean weakness. It just means you've seen too much to talk about. Still, every morning he woke up early, shaved, and put on his old army jacket, not because he wanted attention, but because it reminded him of something that mattered, something he still carried inside, even when the world didn't see it. He never asked for free meals, special treatment, or applause. He only ever wanted one thing: respect. And on that particular day, in that restaurant, he hadn't come to start a scene. He came to sit alone at a booth in the corner, order a hot cup of coffee, and maybe, just for a moment, feel like he still belonged in the world he fought so hard to protect. But fate had other plans, because someone in that restaurant recognized him, not by face but by memory. A memory that was about to shake the entire room. The restaurant was sleek, marble floors, soft jazz playing overhead, and neatly dressed couples sipping wine under golden lights. Walter didn't belong there, at least not by their standards. But he didn't come to impress anyone. He came for the Thursday lunch special, fried catfish and black coffee. A small luxury he allowed himself once a month. As he stepped through the entrance, his slow steps and tattered army jacket didn't go unnoticed. The hostess, a young woman barely in her 20s, smiled kindly and reached for a menu. But before she could speak, a sharply dressed man in a black vest stepped between them. The manager. His eyes narrowed as he looked Walter up and down. "Sir," he said, his tone already cold, "we have a dress code. I'm afraid I can't seat you today." The room didn't fall silent, but the energy shifted. Two men at the bar glanced up. A woman whispered something to her friend and laughed behind her hand. Walter looked the manager in the eyes, searching for even a hint of understanding. But there was none. He opened his mouth to explain, but stopped himself. No use. He'd been down this road before. Instead, he nodded slowly, clutched his cap in both hands, and whispered, "Understood." He turned to leave. His steps were slow, heavy, the kind of steps that spoke volumes, about a lifetime of being dismissed, overlooked, forgotten. No one knew that the man they were turning away had crawled through jungles under enemy fire, had stood between death and 6 other soldiers, had paid for this country's freedom in blood and pain. But none of that mattered now, not to these people. Here, in this world of polished silverware and leather booths, he was just an old man in a jacket that didn't fit their image. As Walter reached for the door, a fork hit a plate with a sharp clink. A chair scraped against the floor. Then another, and another. 6 men stood up in total silence. They were seated at separate tables, none of them together. But when they saw Walter, something stirred deep within them. Recognition, memory, respect. The manager blinked, confused. "Gentlemen, is there a problem?" One of the men, a tall, broad-shouldered figure with a clean-shaven face and clear military bearing, walked slowly toward Walter. He didn't speak to the manager. He didn't glance at the guests. He stopped just behind the old veteran, lifted his hand, and gave a full military salute. The other 5 followed without hesitation. The room froze. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Every phone was lowered. The same people who were ready to dismiss Walter now stared in stunned silence, unsure of what was happening. The lead man finally spoke, his voice calm and steady. "That man right there is the reason I'm alive today." The manager's jaw tightened. "Excuse me, he's the one who pulled me from the wreckage. 1991, Operation Desert Storm." He didn't hesitate for a second. Another man added, "I owe him everything. He's a hero." The manager stepped back, looking suddenly very small behind his press shirt and name tag. Walter turned, eyes wide with disbelief. He recognized the voice, the face, the scar just beneath the eye. It was Marcus Ellis, a young recruit who had once cried out for help in a burning Humvee, and Walter had answered. Now Marcus stood tall, honoring the man who once carried him through hell. The room stood still. Time seemed to stop, the hum of soft jazz now replaced by a heavy silence that wrapped around every single table like a fog. Walter's weathered hand trembled slightly, not from weakness, but from shock. He looked up at the 6 men now standing tall in his defense, men who had once been young soldiers under fire, now powerful figures in suits, but with eyes still holding the weight of war. Marcus Ellis stepped closer, his voice low but firm, a voice trained in leadership and respect. "When I was 22, I thought I was about to die in that burning truck. My legs were crushed. My radio was dead. The enemy was closing in. And just when I thought it was over, he showed up, dragged me out through the flames, took a bullet doing it. That man didn't even flinch." Another SEAL spoke next. 2005 Fallujah. "Our unit was surrounded. Radio call went dead. Walter Green, retired volunteering as a civilian contractor, he didn't wait for permission. He got in a Jeep and drove straight into the firefight to pull two of us out. The vehicle was shot up, engine on fire. He kept going. We wouldn't be standing here if not for him. Each story landed like thunder. These weren't just claims, they were confessions, truths spoken in the kind of tone that carries the weight of life and death. The crowd listened, speechless, some with jaws slightly open, others beginning to understand they were witnessing something far bigger than a restaurant policy. Walter stood frozen, not out of fear or confusion, but humility. He never expected this. He never wanted recognition. But the respect he was denied minutes ago was now pouring toward him like a tidal wave, silent, powerful, and unstoppable. Marcus turned to the manager. You wanted to turn him away. For a dress code. He pointed at the faded patches on Walter's jacket. Those patches? They don't need approval. They're earned in blood. You don't get to deny that. The manager, now visibly shaken, stammered, I didn't know. A third seal interrupted. But we knew. And that's all that matters. Then, without another word, the 6 men surrounded Walter. Not in protection, but in honor. They escorted him back into the restaurant, not waiting for permission. As they passed the tables, no one dared speak. Some lowered their heads. Others stared in awe. Even the kitchen staff peeked out, whispering in disbelief. Walter was seated at the best table in the house. Not because he asked, but because that's where heroes belong. And without a single demand, without raising his voice, Walter Green reminded everyone what true strength looks like, quiet, steady, and unforgettable. As Walter sat at the table, now surrounded by 6 Navy SEALs, something stirred deep inside him. His hands trembled slightly as the men quietly pulled out chairs and sat with him, not as protection, but as brothers. He looked at Marcus Ellis, now a high-ranking officer in the Navy, and for a moment their eyes locked. No words were spoken, but everything was understood. Suddenly, the screen fades to black. Then, the sounds of war come in, distant gunfire, radio static, heavy breathing. We're back in 1991. The desert heat is suffocating. The air smells like smoke and sand. Private Marcus Ellis is pinned beneath a flipped Humvee. Flames lick the vehicle's sides. The rest of the unit is scattered, several already down. Chaos. Screams. Enemy fire raining in from a nearby ridge. Marcus coughs violently, blood on his lips, his radio broken in his hand. Please, he whispers, more to God than anyone. Don't let me die here. Then footsteps. Not running, not panicked, purposeful. Through the smoke, a figure emerges. It's Walter Green, already retired, already a civilian at the time, but volunteering with a recovery unit. His body armor is light. He's not even supposed to be in combat range. But he's there. Bullets tear through the sand around him as he moves fast, low to the ground. He reaches the Humvee, ignores the flames, and begins pulling at the door. His hands bleed. The metal is hot enough to burn skin, but he doesn't stop. With a grunt and a burst of strength, he gets the door open and drags Marcus out, throwing his own body over him as a round hits nearby. Then, bang, a bullet tears into Walter's shoulder. He yells, but doesn't stop moving. Limping, carrying Marcus, dragging him across sand and smoke, he doesn't pause until they're behind cover. Back in the present, Marcus places a hand on the old man's shoulder. You didn't just save me that day. You saved the whole team. You went back out. Twice. We all know what you did. We never forgot. Another SEAL, sitting beside him, adds, 2005, Fallujah. We were cornered in a blown-out building. Radio went down. 5 of us trapped. No way out. Walter was embedded nearby, assisting logistics. He could have waited for command. Could have stayed behind the wire. But he jumped into a Humvee and came straight into the kill zone. The screen flashes again, this time to Iraq. Walter, older now, but just as fearless, gripping the wheel of a beaten-up Humvee as it takes heavy fire. He doesn't stop. He slams the door open, yells, "Move," and helps soldiers pile in. One by one. Fast. Efficient. Bleeding from his leg, his hand still wrapped around the gear stick as he drives through a hellstorm. Back to the restaurant, still silent. Guests watch in stunned reverence. None of them knew what that old man had seen or what he had done. Walter finally speaks, his voice gravelly, worn by time but steady. I didn't do it for medals. I did it because they were mine. My brothers. Marcus smiles, eyes glassy. And now it's our turn, sir. Walter shakes his head, humbled. You boys didn't owe me a thing. Marcus replies, You're wrong. We owe you everything. This moment doesn't just explain why they stood for him, it turns the story into something greater than one act of courage. It becomes a story about brotherhood, loyalty, sacrifice, and the invisible debt real heroes carry. And the few who never forget. The restaurant, once alive with clinking glasses and quiet laughter, now felt more like a sacred hall. Waiters had stopped mid-service. Guests sat in silence, watching something unfold that none of them had ever witnessed before, and likely never would again. Walter sat in the middle of it all, surrounded by the very men whose lives he once saved. 6 Navy SEALs, battle-hardened warriors. Now, they sat with him not as bodyguards, but as living proof of his bravery, loyalty, and quiet power. And yet, Walter didn't sit with pride or arrogance. He looked down at the table, one trembling hand resting near his coffee cup. You could tell this attention was foreign to him, uncomfortable. He didn't know how to wear it. But Marcus did. The SEALs didn't just sit with him. They ordered meals for him. They refused to let the waitress take their orders until Walter's came first. He's the ranking officer at this table, Marcus said with a grin. The waitress smiled, tears in her eyes. The manager, red-faced and shaken, hovered nearby, unsure of what to say or do. Eventually, he stepped forward. Sir, he muttered to Walter, voice cracking. I want to apologize. I didn't recognize who you were. Walter turned his head slowly. You didn't have to, he said calmly. You just had to treat me like a man. Those words landed heavier than any lecture. The SEALs nodded silently. Marcus stood up, facing the guests, his voice carrying through the room. How many more like him have we passed by without seeing? How many heroes walk past us every day, invisible because they don't wear wealth or flash? A woman at a nearby table wiped her tears. A man placed his hand over his heart. Then something powerful happened. The entire restaurant stood up. Not one person stayed seated. A quiet, respectful standing ovation for a man who had asked for nothing, but given everything. No music, no camera crew, just the sound of people clapping softly for a man whose life had been defined by silent sacrifice. Walter didn't smile. He didn't cry. He just sat quietly and gently nodded. The manager, now humbled beyond repair, tried again. Is there anything I can offer you, sir? Walter looked at him, then at Marcus, then at the 5 others who had stood for him, and finally said, Just make sure the next man who walks in wearing this, he tapped his worn army jacket, doesn't have to prove himself before he eats. A moment of complete stillness followed. No one dared interrupt it, and then Marcus, with a quiet grin, leaned over and whispered, That's why we still follow your orders, Sergeant. The table laughed softly, but the message had been sent. This wasn't just about Walter Green anymore. It was about every veteran, every aging hero, every soul who walks through life carrying the weight of sacrifice that the world too often forgets. In that restaurant, justice wasn't loud. It didn't come with yelling or revenge. It came with honor, loyalty, and a silent stand that changed everything. The plates were cleared. The coffee was finished. The crowd had returned to their meals, but the energy in the restaurant was forever changed. The manager was no longer walking tall. He was quieter, more present. The staff moved with a new kind of awareness. The guests stole glances at Walter, not out of curiosity, but out of deep, quiet respect. Walter sat back in his chair, his eyes scanning the faces of the 6 men who now surrounded him. Brothers, survivors, living reminders of choices he had made in impossible moments. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small photograph, worn, bent at the corners. He placed it gently on the table. It was a black and white photo of a young unit, arms over each other's shoulders, faces covered in sweat, dust, and joy. He tapped the photo. Half of them didn't come home, he said softly. I think about them every day. Every single day. The table went quiet. No one touched their drinks. No one interrupted. Walter continued, "People think war is about bullets and borders. But it's not. War is about faces. The man next to you. The man you drag out when your leg's busted and you can't see through the smoke. The man who screams your name and you run toward it, not away." His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't cry. "I don't wear this jacket because I want people to know who I was. I wear it because it reminds me who I still am. A soldier may retire, but a servant doesn't." He looked directly at Marcus. "You boys didn't owe me anything. You didn't have to rise, but you did. That means more than medals, more than parades. It means someone still remembers." Marcus leaned forward. "We never forgot, sir, and we never will." Walter nodded slowly. He looked out the window, the sunlight washing over the worn patches on his sleeve. This country, sometimes it moves too fast. It forgets its roots. But respect? That shouldn't need a reminder. We built everything we have on the backs of people who never asked for credit. He turned his gaze to the room again, not angry, not bitter, just tired and honest. "If there's one thing I'd say to anyone listening," he said, voice firm, "it's this: never assume a man's worth by the shine on his shoes. Look at the weight on his shoulders. That's where the story lives." And with that, he slowly stood up. The 6 Navy SEALs stood with him. Again, not out of obligation, out of honor. As Walter stepped out of the restaurant, the sun warmed his face. He didn't walk with pride or anger or even victory. He simply walked like a man who had spent his life doing what was right, even when the world wasn't watching. The 6 SEALs followed behind him, not as a security detail, but as a silent honor guard. They didn't need to say anything. The message had already been delivered. And for once, the world listened. Inside the restaurant, the quiet lingered like smoke after a fire. People whispered his name, Googled his story, looked around at each other, ashamed they hadn't seen him for who he was before someone else had to tell them. One older woman at a corner table folded her napkin carefully, wiped her eyes, and said, "That man shouldn't have had to wait for a seat. We should have been waiting to welcome him in." The screen fades to black. Then words appear in white on the screen. 22 million veterans live in the U.S. today. Many walk among us, unrecognized, unappreciated, and too often dismissed. Some carry scars we'll never see, and stories we'll never hear unless we choose to listen. Soft piano music begins to play. A narrator's voice comes in low and reflective. The man in line behind you at the store, the woman sitting alone in the diner, the old man wearing a faded jacket. They might be carrying a piece of history that helped shape the life you now live in freedom. Respect isn't a reward. It's a right. And sometimes all it takes is one moment, one person, to remind the world of what it has forgotten. A final image fades in. Walter walking away down the sidewalk. Sunlight behind him. His shadow long, but steady. The 6 SEALs follow in step. No fanfare. Just dignity.